Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in here to Murder Church on a Thursday night. Thank you so much for coming in. Please share this out. Hit the old like if you can. That would help us out greatly. Have a very special show here tonight. We're going to be covering the Ellen Greenberg case that a lot of people are talking about right now. I've got a special guest back here. Former FBI agent Julia Cowley is going to be joining me. I'm super excited. Thank you all so much, and let's rock and roll.
She wasn't answering, so after about a half hour, I decided to break it down. I see her now just on the floor with blood. Like she's not responding.
Okay, is she breathing? Look at her chest. I need you to calm down, and I need you to look at her chest. It's really.
I really don't think she is.
Listen to me. Someone's on the way. Look at her chest. Is she flat on her back?
She's on her back. So I bring her.
Look at her chest and tell me if it's going up and down, up and down.
I don't see her moving.
Okay, do you know how to do CPR?
I don't.
Okay, I can tell you what to do, okay, until they get there. I want you to keep her flat on her.
God.
Hello?
Yeah, hi, okay.
Are you willing to do CPR with me over the phone until they get there?
I have to, right?
Okay, so get her flat on her back, bare her chest, okay? You want to rip her shirt off. Okay. Kneel down by...
It's a long knife.
Don't touch anything. Yeah, don't touch anything.
Let's rock.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in here, Publicly Buzzed Live. Another, like I said earlier, Murder Church on a Thursday night. I see the Botrix joined us, which is freaking sweet. Sometimes that doesn't happen. Welcome in, everybody. Thank you all so much for coming through. Like I said, please give this a share on the old X machine. Everyone that's been sharing that out, thank you all so much. That's been awesome. Like I said, I've got a very special guest here tonight. Excited to have Julia Cowley on here. Again, former FBI agent. Can you believe that? Coming over here to hang out with Publicly Buzzed. Insane. We're going to be talking about Ellen Greenberg here tonight, a case that I've looked into in the past. I was talking about to Julia just a minute ago about this, but this one's starting to really get a lot of traction right now. A lot of people are talking about this, a lot of different opinions out there. And I wanted to kind of look at this in a little bit of a different aspect from both sides, the possibility of murder and suicide. So bring your opinions in the chat. Let those be known as well. And let's get our guest in here real quick. Julia, what's up?
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well, thanks.
Thank you for being here, first of all. This is awesome.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Man, I'm stoked. I think this I may be mistaken, but I think that you're my first FBI agent. This is crazy.
Well, great.
This is insane.
Then I'll be the best.
Yes. This is pretty wild. No, man, I've been watching you on X, and we've interacted a few different times, and you've always been super cool on there and super nice. Yeah. And I saw that you were like right now, this week, yesterday, you dropped the first episode of the Ellen Greenberg, I guess the series that you're doing currently,
right,
on the Consult podcast that you host. And
yes.
Yeah, man, I listened to that episode and it was freaking awesome. And I can't wait for episode 2. But
Thank
when I
you.
saw that you're going to be dropping that, I was like, oh man, this will be perfect, and reached out. And
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm happy to talk about the case. I usually am reluctant to talk about a lot of cases unless I've looked at them because I don't want to speculate too much or try to guess. And I had the opportunity. I got all the court records in this case, and so I feel comfortable talking about it. And since we've already done all our episodes on the show, and the first one, as you said, just dropped yesterday. So I feel like I know this case very well. So when you
nice.
invited me on, I'm like, I'm happy to talk about it. I feel very comfortable with it.
That's cool. And yeah, that one website, the crimetimelines.com website is incredible.
Yeah, there are a lot of documents on there from the court as well.
That has been a great refresher for me. Again, I have went through this in the past, but it's been, probably 2 years ago when we did that. So when you start, and it's very, some of these cases can be extremely intimidating. There's so much information, there's so much going on. And, personally, I also work a regular job, so there's only so much time in the day. But man, this site made it very feasible to kind of collect your thoughts and kind of go through the story in order. So
yeah, it has a lot of documents. I don't believe every document is on there, but quite a few are. So you can kind of go through and read it. And unlike you, I'm retired, so I can devote the time. And of course, at one point in my career, that this was my full-time job to look at all these cases. But you're right, it takes a long time. And if you have another full-time job, it's hard to go through all these cases.
And out the gate here, as we've already met Julia here, real quick, a retired FBI agent and profiler. Again, in the description down below, you'll be able to find her links, not only the one for X, but also for her podcast, the Consult podcast. She hosts that. Again, I was just going through and getting some information about you. Julia spent 22 years in the FBI investigating violent crime, including serial killings, sex offenses, white crime collar, public corruption. She was also a member of the FBI's evidence response team. Prior to joining the FBI, you also worked for the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. Is that where you're located now, in Tennessee?
No, I'm in Massachusetts.
Okay.
So my first office in the FBI was Boston, and I ended up coming back up to the Boston division and finishing my career up here and retired up here. But
Okay.
yeah, and yeah. So I started my career in law enforcement in Tennessee.
Or was you from that area originally?
No.
Okay.
No,
See, I kind of put that together.
Yeah, I'm originally from the West Coast.
Okay.
Oregon is where I grew up, and my first job, my dream was to be a forensic scientist and work in a crime lab. And the first job offer that I had when I got out of school was in Tennessee, and it was the best decision I ever made in my life to pick up. I packed a Ford Taurus, rented Ford Taurus with all my belongings, and drove to Tennessee, and not knowing what to expect. And it was the best decision I ever made because I got so much great experience, hands-on experience there. So, and that's how I started.
That's really cool. When I saw that, I was even like, oh shit, because you've probably seen me talk about it. I'm in West Virginia, so Tennessee's not very far.
Not that far.
A very big state, but yeah, man, that's really cool. So
I don't think people realize how big Tennessee is, how far it is to go
Yes.
from Knoxville to Memphis.
Dude, like
It's a long way.
Yeah, if I go into I'm 2 hours from Tennessee, right? From Johnson City, Kingsport, that area. But yeah, if you go to Nashville, it's 8-9 hours. That's not really close at all.
It's not. And I loved living there. It was I don't want to say it was a tough decision, but because I did want to join the FBI someday, but I missed Tennessee so much. I really did. I had no idea what it would be like living there, and I ended up loving it.
Yeah, anytime I've ever been to Tennessee, Tennessee's been super cool, and just kind of the Appalachia vibe, it kind of bleeds into all of Tennessee, I'd imagine. But yeah, man, that's really cool. So just kind of to start before we dive into kind of a little bit of the details here in the Ellen Greenberg case, but what was what kind of got you looking into this a little bit further?
Well, I've always been interested in this case, just following it in the media. And then a lot of our listeners had requested the case. And one listener who had been with our show from the very beginning was like, "When are you going to do Ellen Greenberg?" And I said, "Probably beginning of next year." And I didn't have plans to do it at the beginning of the next year, but since I made that promise, like
You're like, "Yeah, this is going to
I
work
have
out
to do it.
perfect."
I have to do it. And I knew that there were records out there, and it was a matter of, getting all the records for, doing the FOIA request
And like
and
you said,
going,
you want to have all of the information that possible to really dive in, right? Just not.
yeah,
That's the best way
like
to
to
be.
see things myself, just to make sure I'm accurate and not necessarily take someone else's word for it or their interpretation. Not that I think, not that I don't think there's trustworthy news sources out there or other shows or anything, but I guess my controlling nature, I want to see things myself and see, um, so getting the court records was, really important to me so I could see the interviews and the documents that they had. And
There's
then,
so
I was
much.
also a little concerned because it's a civil case. We're not getting the entire police file. So are there things we're missing? And could we still do an analysis without that? And looking through the records, I thought we could do the case justice.
Nice. And so yeah, I do have I've written out a little bit of a layout, kind of a script here to
Okay.
kind of roll through here. But again, it's going to be very free flowing. But let me just kind of out the gate break a few of these things down here,
Mhm.
unraveling the Ellen Greenberg case here, which is very much, I think, honestly, a mystery. Ellen Greenberg, 27 years old when she did pass away, first grade teacher. It happened in Philadelphia. This happened on January 26, 2011. And then, of course, we are still talking about this even today because of her parents, Joshua and Sandra Greenberg. Initially ruled, and very controversial at this point in time, originally ruled a homicide by the Philadelphia Medical Examiner. Then a ruling amended 4 months later to suicide. And again, this sparked a lot of, outrage and coming into legal battles now. And one of the craziest things, as soon as anybody hears about this case, how she was found with 20 stab wounds, including 10 to the back of her neck and head.
Mhm.
That's what kind of makes everyone go, what the hell? What is going on here? But you add that on top with the medical examiner originally kind of or determining this is what you would think after seeing some like abrasions like that, or actually, and then looking into the actual autopsy photos. We'll get into that a little bit later, but
Mhm.
a lot of these wounds didn't necessarily do a lot of damage,
Right.
right? So one of my first questions, actually, I'm going to just break off here because of a question I have, is a lot of this. I'm going to pull this up here. Hold on. Get a shot here. I've got the Ellen Greenberg autopsy, the 3D pictures up here. So these right here. So, I mean, would these be considered like hesitation marks?
Well, some of them are, I don't want to say superficial, but they maybe 0.2 centimeters into her.
They're so tiny.
They're pretty superficial. Many of them are, including the ones in the back of her head. So that was those who interpreted this as self-harm said that those were hesitation marks. And so, and I do find them curious because
That's
you don't tend to see that in homicidal stabbings where you may have a scratch here or there, you may have defensive wounds, but you just don't see that number of superficial wounds in homicidal stabbings. At least it hasn't been my experience.
yeah. And that's almost what leads to the, or leads to the debate. Really, a lot of people that want to go down the side of the suicide. You could almost see, and another aspect of this is, I'm kind of breaking already off completely off the script, but there is a mental illness aspect to this as well, and some of the drugs that she was on, and some of the stuff that we've now learned about, that she was having some issues, and she was seeing a psychiatrist. to kind of go into the thought that she was contemplating or even thinking about killing herself and committing suicide. You know, have you, in your experience, ever seen anything, I'm not going to say like this, but like someone that maybe has killed themselves with a knife where they've, you know, for lack of a better term, they're almost like practicing a little bit. They're trying to get the courage up to get that fatal plunge in.
Yes, I have seen that. But I haven't seen them like this. So what's unusual about these is that they tend to be a little more scattered than what I have seen, and they tend to be in different orientations. Now, the hesitation wounds that I've seen in cases, and I haven't worked on a lot of suicides. The cases that I have worked on were what we would consider equivocal deaths, or a case where, like when I was in the laboratory, a case where, okay, they arrived at a crime scene, such as Ellen's, or they arrive at a scene, I should say. I want to call it a crime scene. But they arrive at the scene, and first responders and the initial police officers don't really know what's happened. So we would get called, this is in my role when I was with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, we would get called to the scene, and we would process that scene as if it were a homicide, just like because they don't know for sure. And then ultimately, after we process the scene and the autopsy's done and putting the investigation together, the lead investigator, along with the medical examiner, they would ultimately decide, was this a homicide or a suicide? So, and particularly in the behavioral analysis unit, we have worked on a lot of equivocal deaths where it's not clear what happened. Was it an accident? Was it a suicide? Was it a homicide? So in the cases where it turned out to be suicide, the hesitation or the wounds that we see that would be considered hesitation wounds, or practice, or getting up the nerve, or seeing how bad it's going to hurt, tend to be localized in the area where the final wound would be.
They're going to actually do it.
A little closer together, not as scattered. Now, I have seen a case where ultimately the person, they cut their wrist, but they had tried to cut down by their feet where there's arteries down there, and there were hesitation wounds down there. So that's not close to where the ultimate fatal wound was inflicted. So I can see why somebody might think these are hesitation wounds, but they're also not
to be so scattered,
similar to what I've seen.
Because if you're picturing it in real time, I mean, they would literally have to just kind of be going wild, right? Like,
yeah. And
then you've got the dexterity part of it, where, like, I mean, this isn't exactly easy. Like, whether your hands like this
easy.
Or
and
like you can get back here, but also, like, the blade, as you can see, like, even right here, it's pretty much straight. I mean, her head would have to be down as well. So it's like a very, and again, I'm just kind of speculating and bullshitting here, but, like, I'd imagine that it's happening in rapid succession, right? It's not like she's not aiming, like she's just going. If that is what would be happening.
Yeah, possibly. Now, to me, this doesn't, in the scene itself, doesn't come across as a like completely chaotic stabbing where somebody's out of control.
Okay.
It's not like it's hard to explain, but I think there's probably maybe two different attacks. And when I say attack, I'm not saying it's by somebody else. It could be by her but just two different sets of attacks. And it doesn't seem to be, I don't want to say as violent, but as it's more contained than some of the other homicidal stabbings that I've seen. But you're right. Now, we had debate about this on our show about whether it was even physically possible for someone to inflict the ones on the back of the neck.
Of the head, yeah.
Now, I thought it was possible. I don't think it's easy. I think it's awkward. but
You
some of
can.
my colleagues thought it was not possible. So sometimes we disagree on our show.
Yeah.
I think physically it is possible, but I don't think it would be easy. Now, I do think the Greenbergs hired some experts who determined that it was like biomechanically not impossible. So I guess I have to defer to them because I'm just, you know, thinking about it and doing it to myself.
That's
I'm
how
like,
I kind of
I
think
could
about it
do
as
Yeah,
well.
I
Yeah.
think I could do it, but why would I? Right?
Right.
Why would I do that if I wanted to take my life? That doesn't really make a lot of sense.
So yeah, I kind of broke off there because immediately I've jumped into questions, but that's probably how this will roll here. But so yeah, let me go through a couple of things here. Let's see. I've got some notes here.
And then I'd hate to interrupt you.
No,
but
anytime, please feel free.
You have the picture up. So on her, and you can't see it on this one exactly because her hair is not shaved in this photo, but you see that incised wound that is
The big one
right
here?
there. Yeah, you got your cursor on there. So to me, that is not consistent with a suicidal stabbing. I
And that one
find
actually went pretty deep.
it did. It's a slice to her head, and then and then I'm sure your audience knows the difference. But if they don't, the incised wounds, they are longer than they are deep. The stab wounds are deeper than they are long, and so having the combination of incised wounds and stab wounds is more consistent with homicidal stabbings. And I'm not just saying this anecdotally or common sense. This is the research that we did in differentiating between a homicidal stabbing and a suicidal stabbing. The research supports that. So we don't just take wild guesses or say that, that doesn't make sense to us, or I've never seen that before. We actually go to the research. And so, but that wound there was particularly interesting to me. And then underneath her hair, which you can't see here, there's a scratch on the back of her head as well. And there's another photo, I think, that shows it better. But that also, to me, is not consistent with a suicide stabbing. I mean, it's an additional injury that is unexpected in a suicidal stabbing. I mean, not to mention they're all over the back of her head.
And one of the new things I read was that I don't think that I knew previously was that somebody had the opinion that she had been strangled.
So yes, so there is definitely hemorrhage in her strap muscles of her neck and the anterior portion of her neck, and which is not documented in the autopsy. Now, under questioning during the deposition, the medical examiner who performed the autopsy did acknowledge that there was hemorrhaging in her neck. However, while that could indicate strangulation, it could indicate blunt force trauma, asphyxiation, the medical examiner would not say that it was a result of strangulation because he didn't see other associated injuries with that. Now, it is the theory that she was likely strangled first. This is the theory of the plaintiffs, in this case being the administrators of Ellen's estate, being her parents. It is their theory that she was strangled and the rest of the scene was staged. Now, that is another injury that, to me, does not make sense in a suicidal stabbing. Why does she have hemorrhage in her neck? And the hemorrhage is not a lot, but there is associated contusions that were not documented in the autopsy either. And so this is really problematic for me in saying, okay, she didn't have any other injuries to her and therefore she did this to herself. I don't know how you do that. I mean, I think somebody needs to explain how that happens, because it's not easy to get those kinds of injuries to your neck. Your neck is concave. It's not like it sticks out. It's not like it's out bumping things. It's very indicative of, I'm not going to go to the point of saying she was strangled because she did not have any petechiae in her conjunctiva that at least was documented in the autopsy, or that any other experts noted, even on the Greenberg side. But she, she definitely had blunt trauma, and that's the medical examiner who did the autopsy did acknowledge that in his deposition. So it wasn't like a difference of opinion. This is the opinion of now all the experts that have either looked at it, whether they did the autopsy or they're looking at photos from the autopsy. She has hemorrhaging in her neck. So due to some kind of blunt trauma, which is very problematic.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like, I mean, how would that happen if we're going down the suicide route, right? Like,
right.
Yeah.
It's an area of control, and I'm sure you'll talk about it, but there's additional bruising on her body, which are areas where if someone's trying to control somebody, they would grab.
I think that they got the full body in here, I think, anyways. Here we go.
Right. Yep. So she's got the bruising on her wrists, and they were described even on her wrists as being in various stages of healing, but at least on one of her wrists, there was what was described as fresh bruising. And it's hard to age a bruise. It's hard to determine exactly. You can kind of tell, okay, this might be healing a little bit, particularly when a body begins to decompose. It can be a little more difficult. And
that is a lot of bruising. I mean, just between the arms and the legs.
It's a lot of bruising. It's a lot of bruising. But
like you said, with the control, if somebody's trying to control someone, it's, a wrist is easy to grab, and she's, more petite than him, of course.
Right. The bruising on the wrists and on the neck, I think, are troubling. Plus the number of bruises. Now, bruising was noted in the autopsy. I can't remember how many he documented, but it was not nearly the amount she actually had. There are several more areas of bruising on her body, again, in various stages of healing. And I've been unable to find any kind of explanation for that, or even discussion, like for example, she was taking medication, or if she had a medical issue of some sort that was causing bruising, I would think somebody would have noted that or been aware of it. But I cannot find any logical explanation for all the bruising on her that would not have come from, could have come from sports or anything like that.
Yeah, she's a teacher. She's a first grade teacher. I mean, she's not getting beat up by these kids, I would imagine.
I mean, there are medications and there are medical problems that could cause bruising, but I would think if she had those problems, that those would be documented somewhere. Somebody would have said, oh, well, she was taking this medication, which started causing her to bruise, or having issues with bleeding, like her gums were bleeding more, she was getting bloody noses, and things like that can also be associated with medications that cause bruising, or blood disorders or whatever. But there's no indication of that, so there's really not a good explanation for the bruising. I mean, did she just bruise easily, or were these injuries that were caused from some activity or by someone?
So on the flip side of my first question there, with the hesitation marks and the possibility of her doing it to herself, on the flip side of that, let's just go to the murder route. And it seems odd that someone would be just kind of like jabbing. You know what I mean? They're not really fully stabbing someone, right?
Right. And it's not impossible that an offender would also have hesitation. We call them hesitation marks.
All right.
Everybody always assumes, well, when we say hesitation marks, we're talking about a person who is self-harming versus potentially an offender who is not used to killing and is having problem actually
going through with the full
plunging the knife in,
I
possibly.
really kind of wasn't putting that into perspective either there, because I was
It's
like,
just
this is
another
also
way to look
odd.
at it. It's
But
another
yeah,
way to look at
that's
it.
a great point, though. Yeah, if you're somebody you're not a murderer, you're not out here stabbing people, and you're in this predicament all of a sudden, whether you've planned it or not, all of a sudden you're faced with the event, right?
Yeah, I mean,
So
let's say there's been, and we've seen this so many times in cases where somebody had, like, an offender has done something to a victim unintentionally, or maybe intentionally, but doesn't plan to inflict the amount of damage that they did. And this time there's no getting out of it, right? So they've got to somehow, there's no explanation. They hit somebody over the head or they punched them. It's like, wait a second, I can't get caught for this. So they end up killing them and they stage it. So, if we're looking, let's say, at the murder, is this a murder scenario, a homicide scenario, some injury is inflicted and this time there's no explaining it. And so therefore the person, the offender, has to actually, finish the deal and kill her and cover up the initial injury by killing her. Because this time they're not going to get out of it. I'm not saying that's what happened in this case. I'm saying that is a possibility. And that's why an offender might have hesitation, because they're not used to this kind of violence. They've never actually killed anyone before. They never stabbed anyone before. It's not easy to do. It's very gruesome. It's very difficult. So if you're, looking for a spot, or you're just really uncertain, you could see that there might be hesitation marks. So
and I mean,
just because you're seeing these superficial wounds, you cannot say, oh, that's indicative of, self-harm.
That is super interesting. Yeah, because I was really not thinking about it like that, but that makes a great point. Yeah, like, someone's normally not just out here as murdering people. So,
Right.
But you also brought up the possibility, something that's very heavily talked about in this case, is the staging aspect, right? Like the way she was kind of found is odd.
It is odd. I think the one thing that I just really don't have an answer for, but it kind of bothers me, is the towel that's in her hand. And
that's from the bathroom.
Right.
It's not like a kitchen towel. Yeah.
It's reportedly from the bathroom, not a kitchen towel. It doesn't have any blood on it, as described in the initial investigator's report. He's the medical examiner's investigator, said that it was a pristine towel. There was no blood on it. So that's
very
interesting. Possible staging. Maybe even, there was fruit on the counter. So was that staged? And, was she actually making herself a fruit salad at the time? I don't know, but there are some things that I think you have to look at and consider, could this be staged?
And, kind of jumping all over the place here, but one thing that I had read on this, and I could not find it again, but I was talking about it on X, and then you jumped in there as well, but you guys were also talking about it on episode 1, was the interview with a neighbor who did see the deadbolt, apparently, or the latch, where they could see that this was true. A lot of, folks don't even know that aspect and want to immediately jump to that this is entirely staged, and that, Goldberg, broke in to make this look like it happened, and there was no actual latch there to begin with. But we do have at least one witness, a neighbor, who says that they saw that. But you guys also made a great point. How clear could that have actually been in passing? We're told that he had the door open an inch. So
yeah, and that was an estimation by Sam Goldberg that he could get the door open about an inch. But yeah, I think it's been widely reported that only Sam was there, or that Sam had attempted to get the concierge. They have a concierge in their building, to come up, and that the concierge wasn't actually with him when he kicked open the door.
Yeah. His statement was he was there, and then the dude's like, "Nah, I wasn't."
Yeah. Yeah. Well, none of that happened. Sam never told police that the concierge was with him. There are some initial reports that say that, and they don't even say it explicitly, but there's like an assumption on whoever did some sort of initial report. But when Sam's actually interviewed, he sits for 2 interviews, they're very short. he never tells police that the concierge was with him when he kicked open the door. So that's not coming from Sam. I don't know where that information came from. Now, what he does do is he goes down, he tries to get he asks the concierge, is there a tool to get that door open? And the concierge says no. They had a master key for like the doorknob, but no tool. So the concierge calls the maintenance supervisor, who is at this point gone home for the day. The maintenance supervisor gets on the phone with Sam. The maintenance supervisor tells Sam, because Sam's like, should I kick it in? And the maintenance supervisor says, no, if you just shoulder it and push it in, it's only held by 4 screws. So if you do that, I can fix it in the morning. So that's what happened. So nobody's with Sam when he actually kicks in or shoulders in the door, however you want to describe it. But prior to all of that, a neighbor comes home, goes into his apartment, comes back out, is taking out his trash, and he tells Sam, they have a master key downstairs to get you in. And Sam says to him, well, it's not that, it's the latch on the inside, or that's the lock on the inside. And according to this witness, Sam shakes the door back and forth. And we talk more about that in the second episode about what he actually said.
Okay.
And so he tells police, it was his impression that the door was clearly locked. And this is all prior to him pushing open the door. So you have that witness. Now, I don't want to
another level of
it adds another level. So it becomes, okay, if the door was really locked, well, then you have to start asking, well, can it be locked from the outside? And I'm not trying to fit this to make it a homicide. I'm trying to just understand what are all the possibilities.
Yeah.
And so one of the possibilities, can it be locked when you're outside? Can it be the inside? Can it be locked somehow? And I don't think any experiments were ever done. I think it's possible it could be. It might require some dexterity. I wouldn't know how to do it, but
almost
it's
feel
possible.
Like that you could, this is jumping out there, but almost like a clothes hanger type situation, right? Like,
maybe.
You know what I mean? Like you'd have to have something with almost a hook to be able to grab it and pull it in.
Yeah. And I've seen reports, and I didn't see this in the court records, but I think that she was interviewed by the media or something, but the building manager said that if you slam the door hard enough, it might lock on its own, and that it had happened to her once. Now, I'll have to go back and look at her interview, but I don't know if she told that to police during her interview. So that becomes that if the door was actually locked. Now, I'm always cautious in any case about eyewitness testimony, not only just eyewitness identification, but eyewitness testimony, because it is some of the most unreliable evidence. And particularly if someone's telling you that you should see something, like this door is locked, then their minds might just see and remember. And
that makes total sense.
And
even just thinking about my own memory and situations, it's easy to change my mind if I'm not sure, right?
Yeah. And we've all been really sure about something, and then you see it and you're like, oh my God, not what happened.
Dude. Yeah.
So, but in research even shows that even if the certainty does not really impact it either. So even if someone's really certain, it doesn't mean that they're more likely to be accurate. In fact, eyewitness testimony is the worst. And I would never rely on eyewitness testimony over scientific evidence. So I take that. It's something that we have to consider, and
adds an extra layer. But yeah, you're making a great point.
Yeah, more experimentation with that door lock needs to be done.
And that leads me to another point of how shitty this was handled by the police. And you go into the situation with Samuel and his uncle and his cousin, who are lawyers, and the very next day they come in and they grab a bunch of stuff and they have a professional team clean it, and the police allow this. Like, there's so many levels of like what the actual hell is going on here. To where like the crime scene had no chance of having any kind of like actual investigation.
Right. It's
That's incredibly frustrating.
yeah, I don't even know how that happened. I don't like to be very critical of law enforcement. I
But
don't
it
know
makes you
how it
ask
happened.
but it does make you ask the question of like what exactly is going on here, right? Without being critical of law enforcement, one thing that is absolutely real is corruption and political corruption. And I mean,
Well, yeah. I mean, some
like
people do think that, and
like that's definitely an
I think
aspect of
that,
this.
yeah, I think the decision, and I don't think corruption played a part, but this was determined to be a suicide, right, very, very early on, and
Immediately.
immediately. And I think there are a couple reasons for that. I think one of them being that nobody knew at the scene that she had these injuries to the back of her neck. I think if they had seen those, and there's no evidence they saw 'em because there's nothing documented in the reports that anybody saw it. So I don't think that they knew that they existed until the autopsy was done the next day. So I think the case would have taken on a completely different direction if they had seen that and possibly even seen the bruising to her body. Now she was fully clothed, so they wouldn't have seen all the bruising. But those two things, I think, had they been noted at the scene, it would have been treated differently. So I think that just goes to, I don't think that's corruption at that point. Or at least I don't know how it could be. But the other thing too is they just, I don't understand how they just took the word of the victim's intimate partner at face value.
Which
I mean,
would be the
it's
number
always
one
the husband, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's the
boyfriend.
number one suspect, or at least the first person you have to, say, clear, right? Like,
yeah. Yeah. So they, and then, even talking about the witness that saw the door locked, he wasn't interviewed until 2 days later after. So what happens is they call it a suicide on the scene, which they're really not supposed to do, but they just treated it as a suicide, which still doesn't make any sense because it still should have been processed as a crime scene, but they didn't do that. So and then the next day after the autopsy, it's ruled a homicide by the medical examiner. That is when they start scrambling. They get the search warrant for the apartment. The search warrant is conducted the following day after that. So it's like 2 days later, they conduct the search warrant. But by that time, the building manager had called the police, was asking if she could allow members of Sam Goldberg's family in there to get some items. And
including
also,
her items.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
Yeah, they took the digital evidence, computers, cell phones, some items apparently for the Shiva, and who knows what else. We don't know. And then the police department told the building manager, or gave the building manager, a recommendation for a crime scene cleanup professional company.
Professional cleaning, yeah.
Yeah, professional. And they came in, they cleaned it. And so by the time they do the search warrant, the apartment's been professionally cleaned. And I mean, who knows what was moved around?
Dude.
I mean, obviously blood was cleaned up, and
that compromises everything. Like,
right, everything was compromised. So you have like a few photos from the crime scene, you have her body, you don't have any other items collected. Some of the important items that were taken by Sam Goldberg's relatives. And so you're left with.
And the frustration, I don't mean to cut you off, but the frustration of that by the parents would be, I mean, as we can see, they've been fighting this for 15 years now, is I couldn't even imagine, right? Like if I heard that, I would be like, wait, what happened? Like, like, how do we figure this out now? Like that, dude, I feel horrible.
It's really hard to, it's really hard to understand how this happened. I don't.
It's terrible,
I mean, we talked a little bit about on the show, and we just have to wonder, was it a snowstorm and they just,
Well, it's right. There was a horrible snowstorm coming.
yeah.
That's why she'd gotten off early that day from school. Yeah, and I mean, that part really messes with, I guess, everyone in this case, but it's horrible, and
Yeah.
it sucks, man. One other aspect I wanted to get into, just to honestly go into the opposite side of it, of the possibility of suicide. One thing that we do know that is affects a lot of people in this world, not only in this country, but the mental health aspect.
Right.
We do know that she was having some problems, she was having some issues, and she was seeing a psychiatrist, and she was on a bunch of different drugs as well. I've got those listed here. I can.
Yeah, she had tried some at the autopsy. The two that were found were zolpidem and clonazepam. So something for anxiety and sleep. They were not in large quantities. One was found, I think the zolpidem was in trace amounts, and the clonazepam it wasn't even quantified. It was below therapeutic levels. So I'm guessing that the laboratory didn't quantify it. I used to be a toxicologist, so I feel.
I will
like
say that's one aspect of it that makes me kind of like, I could see the other side of it, because I mean, and I'm sure you read this as well, that even when she was talking to the psychiatrist and said she wasn't suicidal, there were searches on her computer where she was searching suicide and how to commit suicide in an easy way, right?
Yeah, there were, so most of the searches she was doing was she was looking for the effects of certain types of antidepressants, like what are the side effects and things like that. She had looked up Prozac. I don't have it right in front of me. And yeah, there was a search for painless suicide. There were a couple of articles she looked up, which, could have just been, she was kind of going down a rabbit hole a little bit, but she was looking up an article about somebody who was using a cell phone in a bathtub and they got electrocuted.
Oh, wow.
And
I missed that part.
They're just some little snippet, but it's just a snippet of her search history that happened in the weeks preceding her death. And, and also you have to keep in mind too,
well,
that
to make that search painless suicide, this was definitely not one of them. I mean,
this would not.
This is an insane way to kill yourself.
Yeah, this would have been very painful. This would not be what would be considered a painless suicide. So doesn't really fit with what she was allegedly searching for. Now, we don't know for a fact she made those searches, and the computer was in the possession of the Goldberg family before the police seized it 2 days. And they had it for 2 days, or a day, I think. They picked it up on the 27th, so the day after her death. And then I think they turned it into the police on the 28th. So it wasn't, there was there was a break in chain of custody, let's say. But we don't know for sure. I'm inclined to believe she probably did make those searches, but that snippet is such a small amount. It's really not, it's not like she was obsessively making these searches.
Right. And she doesn't make reference to this to the psychiatrist, which, I personally, I'm just assuming here, but I would think that they would be talking to them about that pretty frequently, right? Like, at least the mental health aspect of, I'm feeling these emotions, how do I control this? And especially if you're getting put on these, psychoactive, psychotropic type of drugs, I think that would be a worry of someone, right? Like,
she was asked so she'd only seen the psychiatrist 3 times. So she was just at the beginning of her treatment.
Okay.
And so, and according to the psychiatrist, she denied having suicidal ideation, and she also denied any abuse, verbal or physical, at the hands of her fiance. And she really attributed her anxiety and problems sleeping to work. And the biggest issue from everybody that she talked to, and she did tell many, many people that she was having a lot of anxiety over work. She was very unhappy. And the biggest issue seemed to be that they were changing the way that teachers were going to be entering grades, and had to do with the grading system, and that for whatever reason was causing her a great deal of anxiety. Now, I mean, she was an elementary school teacher, and I know, I mean, not that I ever taught, but I can only imagine how stressful that really can be. And she did have some problem students, and it was, she was questioning, grading them, and they weren't doing well. And this was weighing heavily on her. But I just find the fact that they changed the grading system and this caused her so much anxiety. I don't feel that she was sharing everything that was going on, because to me, that just seems like something that somebody like Ellen would have been able to handle. And so I don't think she was revealing everything that was going on, whether it was at work or
maybe
at
in a
home.
relationship. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I just don't think.
And then
there's
it
doesn't seem
there's some of the text
issue,
where she doesn't, I don't think she ever alleges that anything's happening necessarily with Samuel, but there's the text where she's kind of like asking to move back home.
Yeah, she did inquire with her family if she could move home, and she also asked a cousin if she could come stay with her cousin.
And then when they mention, would that also include Sam, or she doesn't answer back. So
there was no indication that also meant bringing Sam with her. So those were.
So you can kind of read into that a little bit. Just speculating, but another aspect of that is when one of the things that we know is when he's trying to get in before he actually breaks in, the way he's kind of like texting her, right? Like, it seems pretty aggressive, I think. Like, yeah, it does. I mean, somebody would be mad, but I mean, it seems pretty like almost like, oh, when I get in there, I don't know.
Yeah, you bet. What did he say? I
don't remember the quote, but it was along the.
It comes across as menacing, but I guess if you maybe the tone that we're reading it in our heads, but it's like you have no idea. That's it.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And it's kind of like you have no idea what comes after that. I mean, that comes across to me as very menacing, and he's getting mad as opposed to more worried, which I find to be unexpected.
Yeah.
Particularly if there's no history of that kind of talking to her or being angry with her. It just came across very odd. But
another speculative part is just, I mean, you've heard the 911 call. How could you not see the knife in the chest until all of a sudden you have to do these compressions? Yeah. And now, there's a knife in her chest. Like, that sound to me, I mean, I'm just bullshitting here, but that sounded pretty fake. I mean,
it does sound fake, doesn't it?
It really does. That's a very big red flag to me. Just here, there's a knife in her chest.
I'm always
like, he wasn't going to mention that until he clearly knew that the lady on the line was like, well, she knows I'm going to be looking at her chest, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, the way the call comes across to me is there's a lot of hesitation there to help her. It's almost like he
even says, I have to, right?
Yeah, exactly. He's hesitant. And the other thing that it's almost like he's not right there really close to her. At some point he does say her hands are still warm. But she's, the operator is telling him several times in one way or another, look at her chest. Is she breathing? Like, when, is she alive? And so it's almost like he's avoiding looking.
Yes, yeah.
And then when he absolutely has to, because he's got to start these compressions, he's like, oh my God, there's a knife. So, but she's asked him several times, look at her chest. Is she breathing? And it just seems odd that he doesn't see it. And, you can you could chalk that up to trauma response as well, or you can chalk it up to,
it's hard because we're not in that position, right? We're not in that situation. But yeah, as someone just kind of hearing that, and also being in this, field or whatever, we hear a lot of 911 calls and a lot of really traumatic things. And I mean, I've heard a lot of 911 calls that I would think are absolutely 100% real, and they didn't have the vibe that one had. That he's kind of, it's almost nonchalant, like he's just kind of like hanging out for a minute there, and the telltale sign for me was there's a knife in her chest, like it's like
it does. That sounds very. It does sound fake. I agree. I think everyone who listens to it thinks that. I think
that messes with a lot of people too.
Yeah. The other thing about the call that I think it concerns me is that there's this need to tell a story, to let the operator know, I was in the gym, I just came in, I wasn't here, she was here, and it's almost like that comes before anything else, and he wants to tell that story. And so when I hear that, and he does that in his interview as well. In his first interview with police, they ask him what happened, and he starts, well, I was at the gym. So he wants that to be part of his story. And it could be just like, listen, I had nothing to do with this.
Right.
But in the 911 call, he does want that story to be known.
One thing that you guys were making it was a good part of the discussion in the podcast was it would be really nice to know his demeanor in the gym down there while he was working out for the very short amount of time, because there were people in there around him, and if any of those folks could have gotten interviewed by police, that would be interesting because I mean, ultimately, if you aren't a murderer, cold-blooded murderer, and you have just killed somebody, I would imagine you're going to be showing some kind of distress signals.
Yeah, it would just be
that's heavy breathing or whatever.
What they saw. I mean, he did. When he was done, he did have, I mean, you can tell on the surveillance cameras, he's sweaty. And I think, I do believe the concierge said he was sweaty. I think it was noted by witnesses that he was sweaty after working out. But it would be interesting to just, what did you see? What was he doing? Did you think anything seemed odd? Now, if they don't know him, they might not even really know that if he was acting different or not. That it might not mean anything, and it might not be helpful, but it would be something you would want to do.
Something extra, which again, in this entire case, we want a little bit more from this investigation that's just not there.
Oh, there's so much more,
dude.
Yeah.
So to go completely left field here, now I was trying to find something that is as close as possible to this event. And we covered this when it happened. I believe it was last year, and I'm probably going to butcher this lady's name, but Bryn Spectre. It's Spejcher. Have you heard of this one?
I haven't. No.
So this was a crazy story. I believe it was in, if I'm not mistaken, it was in California. I believe it was last year, if I'm not mistaken as well. This lady goes to visit her boyfriend. They're hanging out. They smoke some weed. They smoke a bong. She has a mental break, a psychotic episode after smoking this bong, kills the boyfriend with a knife, just mutilates him, his face, kills his dog, and then calls the cops. When they show up, she is stabbing herself in the neck repeatedly, 9 times, as you can see here. Mm-hmm. And she does not stop stabbing herself until they break her arm with a baton.
Those are all in the front, aren't they?
And these, again, that's a great point too. They're all in the front, like they're not going, all over the place. And this is the only one that's even, and it's not like it at all, but it's the only one that I can find that is like some kind of self-mutilation with a knife that is like rapid response of just going crazy.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a good
but again,
point.
It's nothing alike. But
yeah, but you bring up a good point, Steve, because I didn't approach this case by saying, 20 times. When you look at those graphics and you see like all the knives that are in her,
dude, it's
really, it's very dramatic.
It's insane, dude.
Yeah, it is. And so I didn't approach this thinking, well, there's 20 stab wounds. She had to have killed herself because that is too many. Because of what I've seen. I have seen, there was a case, I remember, this was when I was in graduate school, and I took a course, forensic medicine, and my instructor was the DC County medical examiner at the time, and she was telling us the story of somebody who hammered a stake tent in, or a stake tent, a tent stake into his own heart.
Oh my God.
And, and I really
How
remember.
could you even do that?
Yeah. I really remembered what she said. She said, in her career, she had seen people do the most horrific things to themselves that you would think on the surface would be homicide because no one could ever do that. But she'd seen such horrible things. That was just one example she had given us. And it really resonated with me. And then, of course, in my job, I have seen some pretty horrific things of self-harm. Most of the time, those people are dealing with really significant mental health issues, having mental health breaks that, like this, like that case you just pointed out. So I didn't approach this thinking this is obviously a homicide, because I don't think that it is obviously a homicide just because of the number of wounds to her. I was looking at, other details that might, sway me one way or another, and looking at the research that's out there, what's more common, than not. And of course, victimology in this case is really important. And we're lacking a lot of victimology in that we're lacking a lot of information, or more information about Sam and their relationship that maybe she wasn't telling people about.
Yeah.
Or maybe she was. That's the thing we don't know. I mean, she, from most accounts and almost by all accounts, they had a great relationship, and there weren't any signs to people at the time that there were problems. And most people describe Sam as being a really nice guy, and she was very excited about their upcoming marriage. And there's really nothing other,
Yeah, even the things that I pick out, because, that's all we really can do, right? We're trying to piece it together. It's almost like a puzzle. Even the things that I pick out, I mean, we all have moments or days, with significant others or loved ones where we kind of, it probably isn't the brightest or best moment, right? And if something was just all of a sudden cherry picked out, it would look horrible, right? So,
right, yeah.
I mean, so I take that into account too. And I mean, and we talked about this a little bit earlier. I mean, openly here, I do definitely lean towards homicide, but I'm not 100% there because of all of the questions. And it's hard for me to not still at least entertain the thought or the questions that would go with suicide. So.
Yeah.
And I know that pisses off a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because they want to go hardcore, but I can't.
Yeah, I can't either. There are so many, obviously the lock door is a problem. And, when you look at the lock itself, the way, the picture of it, and the screws are kind of pried out just a bit. Neither side of the lock is completely broken off. And so another question would be, and we talked about this, I think in part one, about, is it possible just the pressure and pulling out those screws slightly, could it cause that bar to pop off? And is it possible he really did shoulder in, that door really was locked, he shouldered the door in and it didn't completely break off? I don't know if it's possible, but that would be something I would want to know. I'd
like to see some tests,
forensic experiment, not just like, what I think would happen, because I don't know. And you would need to have a door that's similar in material and a similar type of lock exactly. And you'd have to recreate it. And then the other question being, can you lock it from the inside? So that's a question I have. The other question, the autopsy and her injuries are so problematic for me that I cannot say 100% this is a suicide either. It's just too. They are so, and those far outweigh the locked door, in my opinion, in terms of what am I going to trust. I don't trust the issue of the locked door, because we have a report from the intimate partner and we have an eyewitness, and neither one of those I trust over medical evidence. So I look at the evidence, and the evidence of her death and her injuries that she has, and
to get to the most logical
Right.
outcome.
Right. And
Because,
then
like you said, I mean, the
looking at the
witness.
research,
Yeah, yeah, and it,
how many, when you look at a suicidal stabbing, what's the average number of stab wounds do you usually see? And do you ever see them in the back of the neck? And I'll tell you, there's just stab wounds to the head. And I'm not saying the back of the neck, but the stab wounds to the head are not seen in suicidal stabbings. So when I say stab wounds, I mean incised wounds. So the ones we see to her head are problematic. The ones the nape of her neck are more, are associated with homicidal stabbings. Now, the suicidal stabbings, you do see those in the chest and the abdomen. You see those, but you don't see them in combination. You don't see them in
yeah,
combination with back to the back of the head. So looking at the research there, stabbing through the clothing, that's also something that is seen much more frequently in a homicidal stabbing than a suicidal stabbing. So you start looking at these types, you look at the actual evidence that we can rely upon, and all it does is raises more questions than answers. And this should not have been ruled a suicide.
dude, yeah.
Um,
Like,
yeah.
and you go back to a little bit of the, the corruption, lack of a better term or whatever. But I mean, because I'm not going to say that the medical examiner was corrupt, but I mean, to change it from homicide 4 months later to suicide, I mean, it makes you question everything because
under pressure, and you have to wonder.
And you're right, yeah, under pressure.
Why
police
do you have that pressure?
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, and if his
how do you keep the medical examiner's integrity? Like if they're going to flip flop like that off of some pressure from law enforcement, that's not good.
Yeah, and I think that he had been told. This is my understanding through the civil case. He'd been told that the door had been locked and that she had to have been alone and that somebody was with him when he broke open the door. And so that issue in and of itself was something that I think was one of the strongest pieces of evidence, and I use that term loosely, that swayed him to call it a suicide, to reclassify the manner of death as a suicide, I should say. And that's what he testified to. And then, of course, some of the aspects you brought up about her mental health. Now, she was being treated for anxiety, and there's no history of self-harm. There's no history of suicidal ideation. So we have to take all that into effect. But that, to me, even all that doesn't say, well, then she would never hurt herself. She would never, I don't even think that that's, something you can say with 100% certainty, that just because she's never self-harmed before, or because she denied having suicidal thoughts, or you can't say with absolute certainty she wouldn't have.
Right.
One of the aspects of her personality is that she was a perfectionist, and she even, she was described by that by her friends, and she had told the psychiatrist that she had a habit of going around and sort of compulsively straightening things up. And so, there are studies of perfectionists who, commit suicide, and they're sudden and they're unexpected. And a lot of times what happens is that one thing goes wrong and they can't bear it, and then they kill themselves, and it is very unexpected.
Wow.
But there have been studies that, in that phenomena. And I actually saw a case very similar to that when I was at BAU. It involved a police officer, and it was an equivocal death. And ultimately, it was our opinion that he did kill himself. And eventually, it was months later, they did develop more evidence to suggest he did kill himself. But it was very unexpected. But he was somebody who was known to be a perfectionist. And then he had something that happened to him on the job that he felt was, he was going to be reprimanded for it, let's say. But it's not something that most of us would think would be worth killing yourself over, but for somebody like him, it was humiliating. It was the worst thing that could happen, and he died in a staged accident.
Wow.
So you do see that. So that was an aspect of her personality you have to consider. You know, was she feeling that she was failing, and because she's a perfectionist, that, so these are all things to consider. But still, none of that outweighs what I see in the medical evidence.
And then here in the chat, and anybody in the chat that would like to pop up some questions, go ahead and bring those up. But I do want to pop this one up here. And did you see this right here? Oasis Cat, publicly buzzed. Can you talk about the post-mortem injuries? Do you remember reading that one of the, I don't remember exactly who, but there was an opinion that one of the stab wounds was done post-death.
Yes. So there was a medical examiner at the Philadelphia County Medical Examiner's Office who looked at one of the injuries, and I think it was the one in her spine, and testified in the deposition that it was there was no hemorrhaging, and it was potentially post-mortem. And now that medical examiner has since said that there could be other reasons, that they could have been an artifact from autopsy. So there is disagreement on that. If there really was a post-mortem,
muddies it further, right?
It does, yeah.
Jesus.
So
because you see something like that, and for someone like me, it'll kind of click for a second. I'll be like, oh, okay, I'll start going down another avenue, right?
Yeah, and I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but what I will point out,
you're in the perfect place to drop some, though. I will go down some crazy rabbit.
I guess what I found troubling is that she was asked very specific questions in her deposition about, and I think even the attorney for the plaintiff said, so this was, post-mortem, and she was definitive, yes. And then after maybe being talked to by the city, she, came out with, an affidavit that I guess outlined other reasons that an injury could be, post-mortem or appear to be post-mortem. For example, it occurred and there just wasn't enough time for it to bleed, or it occurred at autopsy. So she had other reasons why it could be post-mortem other than, she was murdered.
Gotcha.
And that's up for debate.
Interesting. And one more here. Let's see.
But that's a great question, because if that could be resolved, that could answer the question. If that was a post-mortem wound, with certainty, and not because of the autopsy, or then that would certainly indicate homicide. Now, in the autopsy, which you got to be careful with this autopsy, because there are things that were not documented, but he describes hemorrhaging in every single wound. So, but you have to be careful with this autopsy, because there are, I don't want to say mistakes, but there were things that were left out. I mean, what I would call the autopsy is watered down. That's how I would describe it. I don't know if that's on purpose. I don't know if that's out of...
We're leading back into, some corruption.
Well, the reason why I don't think it's corruption is because he did rule it a homicide.
Initially, you're right, yeah.
So he thought it was a homicide. So I don't think he was corrupted, doing the autopsy. I think he thought it was a homicide. I just think it was watered down. I don't think he documented everything. I think he cut corners. There's one part where he described the scalp as being, I forget the word, atraumatic or something, but it's like, that's a mistake, right? And this is under deposition, under questioning. And he said, yes, that is likely because that's boilerplate language, and it's just a typo. So you have these typos, and you have to wonder how much care was put into this autopsy or any autopsy.
Jesus. All right, let's see here. I got another one here. Curville coming through. Has the judge or others who took items from her apartment prior to crime scene processing ever stated what all they took and why? I remember, I think a laptop was taken of Ellen's, if I'm not mistaken.
So laptop, both computers, I think Sam and Ellen's computers, I think her cell phone, I think some clothing was taken, but I don't have a complete list. And I've never seen any public statements of exactly what was taken, but I know the digital evidence was taken because the police did retrieve that the next day. But we don't know what else, we don't know if, like other things could have been taken. I think I saw something in the comments. Somebody asked about her engagement ring that was left.
Okay. That would be interesting.
That's my understanding from the records.
Let's see. I got another one here. Lindsay Hendricks coming through. Question: what do you make of the discoloration on her wrist? I saw it in one full body shot with zoomed in wrist. Did she have the bathroom towel in that hand? I don't know which. Do you know which hand?
I have it here somewhere.
Get back down to the full body.
Yeah, it might be. I have it somewhere here in a report. But I don't have it right in front of me exactly what hand it was in.
So I'm guessing she's mentioning this.
I want to say it was her left hand.
Okay.
But don't quote me on that. But I think it was her left hand, and on the other side of her, I think on the floor were a pair of glasses, which I believe were hers.
I do remember that picture.
Yeah, and the bruise, I don't know what that's from, but it was described by the experts as being, or it was, as fresh.
So let me see here. I've got a $10 one from Low Light Recovery. Would Julia address the supposed RICO involving Sam and some of the accusations made by a whistleblower, law enforcement out of PA? If she is familiar, people did a weird puff piece on him. I've not heard of that.
The whistleblower. I don't know who that is. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I haven't heard of him being involved in a RICO case.
I haven't either.
He did just now, I guess within the last, since all this has started cropping back up since November, made a new statement.
I saw the statement.
He hasn't said nothing basically since.
Yeah, I think that was in response to questions from a reporter from CNN who was doing a deep investigative report on the case, and he had reached out, had several questions for Sam, and he just responded with that statement.
And I mean, in on that side of it, if I was to go because I can flip flop on this pretty easily, trying to figure this out, but I can also see why somebody with all of this cropping back up would also be like, I guess I have to say something, right? So I mean, it's hard to judge someone from that aspect of it as well.
Yeah,
I said, I'm not going to sit here and accuse anybody, but I'm more on the other side. I'm on the homicide side, so I don't know. It's
one
hard.
of the things I never hold against anybody is if they get an attorney or they don't want to talk. Yeah. I mean, I understand that, and I've investigated a lot of cases where the minute you reach out to someone, they're like, talk to my attorney. That's what they're told, and that's what they do, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they've done anything wrong. And I'll have people come in with their attorneys, and they're perfectly above board. I never would blame anybody for having an attorney or not even wanting to speak to police, at least at some point. He did. I think the first time he was interviewed, it was that night. He was taken back to the police station. I don't think he had an attorney. At least on the interview report, it's not documented. Then he went back,
which is crazy. Being his uncle and cousin that he called that night are attorneys. You think they would?
Yeah, and they showed up at the apartment complex. Now, an attorney may have been there. I didn't see it on the interview report where they said, and he's present with his attorney. But he was then interviewed first week of February. And it was documented at that point that he did have an attorney with him for that interview. And the interviews are both very short.
Dude, this thing is a lot. it's a lot. So yeah, you still have 3 more episodes dropping. And
Yes.
like I said before, down in the description, you can not only get her on X, you can also get to the podcast. Definitely check it out. Well, you know what? I listened to the episode, and I don't remember the guy's name. Hold on. It's the dude that wrote the book about the truck killers, like the truckers.
Oh, Frank Fagluzzi.
Holy shit, dude! That episode,
Yeah.
I have to read that book now. Like
It's a
that
good
was
book.
so interesting. Like that episode
Yeah.
was awesome.
Yeah, I was really fortunate that he came on the show because his book came out last summer, and I mean I didn't know him in the FBI. He was much higher, he rose up high in the ranks, and he didn't even work criminal. I worked criminal. He was working foreign counterintelligence, and so completely different area of investigation. But he had written
Actually,
this book,
I'm
and
gonna
then
link that in the chat too. You guys have to hear that. It's a good one. Like
it is a good book, and it's a pretty quick read, but for those who don't know, it's about long haul serial killers, the truck drivers. It's called Long Haul Searching for, what is it? Well, it's called Long Haul. I forget the little subtitle there, but
I'm gonna find it real quick. Yeah, right here we go.
Hunting the Highway Serial Killers. There
Yeah.
you go. That's it. Yeah, so
I have to read
that
this
is
book
really
now.
good.
Like-
It's a good book. And what is so fascinating about the book, the greatest thing, and Frank and I talk about this in the interview, one of the coolest things about being an FBI agent sometimes is that depending on what you're investigating, you learn about a whole other industry. So early on in my career, I learned about the lobster industry in Boston because I had a case involving people who were in the lobster industry. And so I learned all about it. It was fascinating to me. And so to read Frank's book and hear he went out with a trucker, spent some time on the road with a trucker, and just the lifestyle
Yeah.
and the amount of work that goes into it. And so after that, like
In
now
the downtime, like the waiting, he was
the rules and
Yeah.
and having to find a place
so
to
interesting.
stay, and you have to calculate weight, and it's just so much that goes into it. And now I look at truck drivers completely different now. Like not
dude.
that I didn't think that they had a hard job, but now I'm really looking at like, oh my God, all the stuff that they have to do. It's not an easy job. And I thought it was fascinating to look into their life. And what we point out too is that, the majority of truck drivers are not serial killers.
Yeah, that's
but
not the
there's
norm.
Yeah.
I
but
would
there's
imagine.
a few, and they cause a lot of damage.
Because they're traveling, at the end of the day, they're traveling across the country, right? And you're going to pick
Yeah.
somebody up and say wherever, and then you can drop them off wherever. Like, that's horrifying.
Yeah, I liked it. But one of the things I point out to Frank is that in the book, and I don't know if he started out this way, but when he's talking about riding around, I call the guy Trucker Mike. That was his name in the book. And when he's riding around, he calls it like my haul and our load. And Frank really starts to, identify as being, a truck driver as well. And he's like, wow, I didn't even notice I did that in the book. And so he's like joking. He's like, you're just profiling me. But I'm like, wait a second.
It was a really good discussion you guys had. Like,
yeah, it was really good to talk to him. So yeah, I like to do interviews, as I think I told you offline. The cases that we do, they take a lot of time and a lot of research, and so I like to break that up sometimes with some interviews, and I hope that every interview that we do sort of helps inform, like, for example, with the long haul trucker interview. We had done a case involving a young woman, and it's possible she could have been picked up by a trucker and murdered. So I like to think that all the interviews I do, it will somehow better inform us for, another analysis we're doing on a case. And I have an upcoming interview with a retired FBI polygrapher who answers all my questions about polygraphs. And that's always helpful because we're always hearing about, well, he passed a polygraph. Well, what does that really mean?
I'm very skeptical of polygraphs personally. I've actually done episodes on lie detectors.
Yeah. Well, you should listen to this episode because I think it's really informative. He's a really good, and he's a well-respected polygrapher. So my best friend in the FBI was a polygrapher,
Okay.
and I wanted her to come on the show. And she's my biggest fan, other than my husband, but she loves the show. I'm like, will you come on? And she's like, no way, I would never. She's like, I'm not putting myself out there like that.
Oh,
and
man.
so
It can be scary. I mean, I get that
she's
too.
like, I don't want people to know my name. And I said, no, I totally understand that.
You have to do it in like the old school, like Unsolved Mysteries fashion of like you don't do video, but maybe like change her voice. Like,
oh yeah, like Charlie Brown voice. Like
Yeah.
go, wah, wah, wah.
yeah, that would be awesome.
So, but she told me, she's like, I'll find you somebody good. And so we have another friend who's a polygrapher as well. And she wouldn't come on the show either. She's like, but we're going to put our heads together. We're going to find you a really good
Nice.
polygrapher to come on the show. And they did. They found me a
Nice.
great guy. And it's a good interview. But it helps, these kinds of interviews that I do are somewhat self-serving because it's something I want to know about. And I'm hoping that by talking to these experts, I'll learn something and I can apply that to a case someday that we're analyzing on the show, or even a case I've already done and maybe I didn't see something that I should have seen. So there really is a method to my madness with these interviews.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I'm 100% going to keep listening, and I'm definitely going to be listening and waiting on these Ellen Greenberg episodes. And yeah, Julia, I hope you'll come back and hang out with me again.
I will.
This has been really
I
awesome.
appreciate you having me. It was a great talk.
This has been cool. Everybody in the chat, again, all of her stuff is down below. Let me see, what is even today? Thursday. Tomorrow night should be Feral Friday. Make sure you guys come back through 9 p.m. Eastern time here tomorrow. Should be starting, I'm not exactly sure what we're doing, but Dan should be on here hanging out. We'll probably head over to Kick and have a good time. If you're new in here, possibly because of this case, please subscribe. I'd appreciate it. And yeah, Julia, thank you so much. This has been really, really, really intriguing. This has been cool.
Thank you. For
Anything
having me.
before we do head out? Anything you want to plug extra? Go ahead.
Yeah, just my show, The Consult, and if you like the show, give us 5 stars.
Hell yeah. That
If you
helps
hate
you out.
it, then
Just nothing. Just leave.
then just walk away.
Do
Nothing
nothing.
to see here. Nothing to see.
Love it. All right, Julia, thank you so much. Everybody in the chat, have a great rest of your evening, and thank you. Let's go.
Experts.